Good day, friends. Today we are looking in Genesis chapter 36, 37, and 38, and I just want to welcome you to our reading today. In chapter 36, this is cool. So sometimes this is going to be a stretch for some of us to try and fumble our way through some of these names. And honestly, I'd love to be a fly on your wall and try and hear how you guys are going to pronounce some of these names. Because if you're like me, I actually laugh at myself sometimes at how they come out of when I'm reading them. It's great. But I want to encourage you to look through there, and I want to point out one thing that seemed to kind of really spark an interest in this genealogy in me that I want to make sure that we don't pass over these quickly. Obviously, genealogies are there to help validify things like history or events, those kinds of things. But this is a neat one, and I want to show you something here. So in verse 10 of chapter 36, we see the names of Esau's sons, and the first one that's mentioned is Eliphaz. Then if you look at verse 11, we see that one of the sons of Eliphaz is Teman. And so when we say the name Eliphaz the Temanite, what are we thinking of? We think about Job. If you jump over to verse 28, you can see that of the sons of Seir, the Horite, we see the sons of Dishan was Uz and Aaron. What do we think of when we think of Uz? Job was from the land of Uz. And if you jump down to verse 34, when Jobab died, Husham from the land of the Temanites succeeded him as king. Isn't that interesting? We can pull out possibly a connection right here to the book of Job that we've just finished and see how this genealogy can validate some of those potential events in history. I want to be a little careful. We don't want to get too hung up because genealogies can be a bit obscure in different things, but I just think it's fascinating that we can pick those little details out from a genealogy. So there you go. Some points from a genealogy that maybe even surprised me, I'll be honest. Chapter 37. I just want to say before we jump into this, that when you read through the story of Joseph, just enjoy the story. It just fascinates me every time I read it about how godly this young man was. He made a couple of maybe errors and mistakes along the way, but incredibly godly man, and just enjoy the story. If we're going to look in, starting in kind of verses 2, we see that Joseph gets introduced. And the first thing that we see here is that Joseph is favored by his father, and he has a dream. Interesting that right away we can see God's a communicator in things like dreams. We see that right here. He actually gives Joseph 2 dreams. And Joseph does a great job, kind of from verses 5 to 11, of telling us how not to handle a prophetic word without first bringing it to the Lord and asking him for direction and what we should do with it. There are things that the Lord will give us that we should share with others, and there are things God shows us just for us to know and pray through and maybe be encouraged by. If you feel like the Lord is giving you prophetic direction in some way, always remember to test it before you go somewhere and proceed somewhere with it. And then you'll see that his brothers really hate him. In verse 4, if we just back up to verse 4, and I want to ask you this question. Have you ever said something like, "Oh, that person makes me so angry"? I want to encourage you with something. No one makes you angry. You choose to be angry. James chapter 1 alludes to this fact that when we allow ourselves to get angry, we can be guaranteed that the behavior produced is not going to be in line with God's character. And even Jesus referred in Matthew chapter 5 that he who hates his brother is guilty of murdering him in the eyes of the Lord. No one forces you to make a decision of hate. You choose that on your own. So just be cautious about that. Then if we want to look at verses 12 through verse 36 in chapter 37, we see the beginning of the series of unfair events that Joseph is going to go through. And they're going to be a lot of difficult ones. I want to encourage you, friends, if you are in a season, I know we've talked about this a number of times, but again, here we are in this season where Joseph is going to get tested. And Psalm 105, I think verse 19, would talk about how it is amazing how the word of the Lord tested Joseph until Joseph saw it come to pass. And that's such an important point. We never really know sometimes the timing that God is going to bring things to pass, but while we're in a season of difficulty, and Romans 5 would talk about this as well, we can be assured that God is with us and that he has a reason for why he's allowed these things in our lives. And so let's go on to perseverance and character and hope in what God is doing in these situations. And then in chapter 38, we see a chapter that sums up a lot of very ungodly circumstances that happen. And what I just love about this chapter is how clearly it outlines the God of grace, even in the Old Testament. We see that in Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3, that individuals within this story, Judah, Tamar, and Perez, one of the twin boys that Tamar bears, are in the lineage of Jesus. And it always just amazes me that even in the midst of a horrible and sinful situation, God is a God of grace that can redeem and include us in his will. And I just love that our call in those lives is not necessarily to say, Lord, are my works earning me your favor? But rather just humbly coming before the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm a sinner. Please just take my life and use it for your glory. So in your devotions today, ask the Lord, is there anyone in my heart that I hate, that I've chosen to hate, like Joseph's brothers did? And maybe confess that as sin before the Lord, and then just spend some time praising him for his amazing grace that he is able to restore you and I into his plan, even when we're sinners. Have a blessed day.